than 8% of them were represented in our decision-making organs. Would that be bloated? To have a mechanism to ensure that a higher proportion of them were in? Would we consider it just, really, to say that our parliament really represented the people of Kenya if half the people of Kenya are not represented in that parliament? And so when we look at the Constitution, when you look at the chapter on the legislature, you will note that the description of parliament under Article 94(2), the general role of parliament is that parliament manifests the diversity of the nation. How can parliament manifest the diversity of the nation when half the nation is absent? And then it becomes worse because young people who constitute again some 60% plus of the population are hardly in parliament. So I find it rather fascinating that there is half the population of this country that is expected to pay taxes, which will pay representatives of the people, but we think there are representatives of the people who think that there are segments of the country's population who should be taxed without being represented. It actually is a violation of the most basic democratic right. In fact, the whole issue around the revolution in the United States that led to the United States' independence from the United Kingdom, and which was part of our own basis of our independence struggle also, was no taxation without representation. Is it right to tax women and not allow them to represent themselves and the men of this country?
Thank you. I think at this point in time, because of time, we'll take one or two commentaries and questions from the members of the audience. And perhaps one of them can be the question, children are taxed, are they represented?
Oh, thank you, Jim, for that. I want to seek a clarification or rather a comment forwarded to Atsango Chesoni. The argument you put forward that women are not allowed to represent themselves in parliament, yet they're allowed, yet they are required to pay taxes, has drawn my attention. And I just wanted you to look at it in this perspective. Nobody, no law, no regulation, nothing prohibits the women from actually contesting, as opposed to the example you're drawing where the Africans were actually prohibited from exercising their suffrage rights. In this case, you are allowed, as Atsango Chesoni, to actually contest. The problem comes with the electorate because they do not choose you. So I think, in my opinion, I think it's a misrepresentation of facts to some extent.
Okay, this is also forwarded to Atsango Chesoni. First of all, democracy is a value whereby people are allowed to choose who they want. That is one. Secondly, the people who are actually contributing to women not being elected are the very women who are supposed to be represented in parliament. That is second. By having parliament, which is the supreme organ of government, by having men, let's say 3/4 of parliament is men, are we making this very assumption that men are not going to advocate for the basic rights of women? If I was a member of parliament, for example, and I'm a man, it will be very bad for people to assume that because I'm a man, I'm going to enact men-friendly laws. Thank you.
I think we'll have the last question.
Thank you. I think I represent the 2/3 rule in this situation. Okay, my question is, affirmative action has been taken as a political approach to the issue of gender parity, but how then is it supposed to spill over to our everyday lives? If there are 2/3 women in parliament, how does it affect myself as a woman in my attempt to acquire a job or in my attempt to do other things? So how does affirmative action spill over into the other aspects of our society to ensure gender parity in the society as large?
Okay.
Thank you. I think you can reply to the commentaries.
Okay. If we look at Article 27(8), It says, in addition to the measures contemplated in Clause 6, Clause 6 is the one that guarantees affirmative action to any group that has historically been excluded. So let us begin. Have women historically been excluded? Ostensibly, it is easy to assume that women have not been excluded, but it's actually not true. Until 1997, the Constitution of this country did not prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex. So it was okay to discriminate against people on the basis of sex. Women had no legal recourse. And even when when Section 82.4 of the 82.2 of the Constitution was amended to include sexual discrimination as a prohibited ground of discrimination, Section 82.4 B and C was left intact, which meant that women could still be discriminated against in respect of owning property, in respect of whether or not they could inherit, and therefore access to resources for women was extremely prohibitive. Another very important provision of the old constitution, most Kenyans don't realize until 2010, women were not citizens of Kenya. Now, how do you get to vote? You don't get to vote if you don't have an identity card, which allows you to obtain a voter registration card. So whereas in theory, women were actually equal, in actuality they were not, even in theory, because the Constitution itself discriminated against women. Most women live in conditions in this country whereby their identity card is actually in the possession of their spouse. On voting day, they therefore are actually not exercising their own democratic right. And so we have to look beyond the obvious to understand what are the factors that have prevented women from participating in the democratic process. But it's not just the woman as a voter. To stand as a candidate in this country requires a lot of material resources. Women historically have been poorer, again, because of these provisions, because of the culture of discrimination, because women are not allowed to own property in the way that men are. Women have not had equal access to education. So if you look at the statistics for education and who it is that has actually been able to go to school and therefore acquire resources through honest means, I'm not interested in discussing those who've acquired resources through dishonest means. You will then find a different scenario.
Where Kenya we have reached right now, I think taxation is much of an issue compared to representation, because you have seen what has been happening in the recent past. Teachers are going on strike, doctors are going on strike. The major reason is because they are not being paid well. So it has reached an issue whereby taxation is becoming a key issue in as far as governance is concerned. So are we really too much concerned about representation, and are we making the very assumption that men cannot represent women? So I think it's a question to you to actually see, should we really not consider taxation, because it's a key issue in terms of governance today.
Even in respect of taxation itself, women used to be taxed through their husbands and were therefore required to reveal their income to their husbands, who would then, in the situation of an abusive marital relationship, possibly even withhold those very resources which they had earned from them. So I think it's very easy to flippantly claim that women enjoy an equal opportunity, when in actuality they don't enjoy equality of opportunities. Whether you're talking about adults or whether you're talking about children, whereby you're talking about girls and boys in terms of their access to education and resources. I just wanted to point out that the affirmative action clauses do not just apply to electoral offices. They apply Article 27, sub-article 8, says 2/3 of the members of elective or appointive bodies. This is a way to ensure that even in respect of appointive bodies, because if we were to leave aside the issue of electoral office and examine the issue of appointive office, you will note that even where women have had the academic requirements and have distinguished themselves in their fields, historically they have not been given the same opportunities. And they start from behind. The final example I just want to give you is that during the colonial period, the top ranking school for African girls in this country was Alliance. Alliance girls did not have a physics laboratory. Girls who wanted to study physics. So therefore, even if you had the intellectual ability to study physics as an African girl in this country, you didn't have a space. They literally pulled straws. The two girls that pulled the two shortest straws got to go to Alliance Boys. That's why you have fewer women medical doctors than you have men. Now, when you look at some of these constitutional officers, there's a requirement of a certain number of years of practice. Women are therefore disqualified inherently, automatically, by those provisions. And that's why you need some form of affirmative measure. Affirmative measure is a temporary measure to help that group of people who have been excluded. And these problems are not just found with respect to women, they're found in respect of young people, they're found in respect of people with disabilities. People who need some way in which to be helped to catch up with the rest of the society. The idea is that somewhere along the line, once as a society we get used to seeing other people in our diversity, we will begin to actually look at people objectively. And we will begin to address some of those historical injustices. Thank you.
Thank you. Because of time, ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll take the final comments from the panelists. I think we'll start with Boniface. Your final comments with regards to the gender role.
Basically, my final comments would be this gender parity rule is a rule to resolve historical injustices. And in order for us to appreciate that we are living in a modern society, and we are living in a society that really should appreciate the value of women in a society, then the gender parity rule, or the members or the legislators, should find a way in which they should make it practical for it to work. That basically is my point of view. Thank you very much.
Okay. Sindano, in your final comments, what is the best approach the August House should take in implementing the gender rule?
Well, as we had suggested earlier, there isn't any fast and hard rule as to approach. The basic what we would expect the Parliament or the August House to bear in mind are, number one, the constitutional obligations that are there. Number two, the geographical and demographic ratios between male and female in Kenya. And then number three, to adopt an approach that allows participation. Whether it is going to be the political party or party list, or it's going to be proportional through nomination, or a blend of both. The basic threshold should be, as we had mentioned before, if we can attain the 52% women female representation, then we'll say that we are adequately represented. The gender parity is not the 33% that we're talking about. We're looking at 52% because the ladies constitute 52%. That should be our utopia. But since we're taking baby steps to reach there, we should, in all respect to the Constitution, to cultural norms and morality, of course, any approach that will be crafted or will be drafted by the August House could or should bear in mind the different approaches that have been taken into consideration in other jurisdictions. But there is a lot of democratic space that we are yet to explore. If we exploit too fast, for example, if we take giant leaps, then we will leave very many people behind. In whatever way we do, we carry along our weakest members, and our weakest members of our society are those who have been marginalized, those who have what we call we term as who have suffered historically, and it isn't actually historical. If you actually examine, it's actually Western civilization that has taken that made us go where we are. Because if you look at our cultural representation of female resource management, look at the Ma people, look at the Kikuyu, look at the Luo community. There was a role. There were gender roles. What Western civilization did gave us a legislative framework that gave the male or the dominant gender all the role. I mean, decision making.